The moment the police cruiser's lights exploded into the quiet evening, the sidewalk seemed to shrink beneath her feet, and the weight of every watching eye pressed down at once. What should have been an ordinary walk home turned into a public spectacle in seconds, as a uniform meant to protect instead chose to humiliate. The officer's posture was rigid, his authority loud even without words, and the woman standing before him felt something painfully familiar settle into her chest, the cold knowledge that she was already judged before anything was known. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe in kindness and second chances even when the world feels unfair, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, because what happens next is a reminder of how truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it. She stood there in the fading orange light of sunset, a black woman in a simple coat, grocery bag hanging from one hand, dignity held together by sheer will. The officer's scrutiny was not subtle. It was the kind that lingered too long, that searched for wrongdoing instead of safety, that made the air feel thinner. People slowed their steps. Phones hovered just out of sight. The humiliation wasn't only in the officer's actions, but in the silence of everyone else, in how quickly a crowd can become complicit by doing nothing. Her heart pounded, not with guilt, but with the familiar fear of being misunderstood, of being reduced to a stereotype she had spent her entire life proving wrong. Inside her, memories stirred. She remembered her mother teaching her to stay calm, to keep her hands visible, to never raise her voice even when her spirit screamed. She remembered working twice as hard, studying late into the night, carrying expectations heavier than any bag of groceries. She had learned that strength did not always look like defiance. Sometimes it looked like standing still while the world tried to bend you. And so she stood there now, breathing slowly, grounding herself as the officer's behavior drew sharper edges, as his assumptions hardened into something that felt less like law enforcement and more like power unchecked. What the officer did not see was the quiet exhaustion behind her eyes, the long days spent serving others, the years of sacrifice that shaped the woman before him. He did not know the nights she had slept too little because other people needed her more. He did not know the countless lives that had steadied because her hands were steady, because her mind was sharp, because her heart refused to give up on humanity even when humanity disappointed her. To him, in that moment, she was not a whole person. She was a problem to be controlled. As the situation dragged on, something shifted. A supervisor was called. Paperwork was requested. Names were checked. The woman reached calmly into her bag, not with panic but with purpose, and provided identification that made the air change. It was subtle at first, like a breeze before a storm breaks. The officer's confidence wavered. His posture adjusted. The crowd sensed it too, that electric moment when a story turns. The name on her identification carried weight, not because of status alone, but because of responsibility, because of the trust placed in her by institutions and communities alike. Her identity unfolded not as a weapon, but as a truth too heavy to ignore. She was not just a random passerby. She was a respected judge, a civil rights advocate, a woman whose career was built on justice, fairness, and accountability. She had spent decades holding others to the law with compassion and integrity. And now, in a cruel twist of irony, she had been forced to stand on the other side of that thin line, experiencing firsthand the very injustice she worked tirelessly to dismantle. The realization hit the officer like a sudden mirror held too close. The authority he wielded moments ago shrank under the weight of his own actions. His regret was instant, written across his face in the way certainty gave way to discomfort. But regret, as powerful as it can feel, does not erase harm. The woman did not gloat. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there, composed, allowing the truth to speak louder than anger ever could. In that silence, the lesson was unmistakable. The crowd's mood shifted from curiosity to reflection. Some lowered their phones. Others looked away, ashamed. What they had witnessed was not just an individual mistake, but a snapshot of a larger problem, one that thrives in assumptions and survives in unchecked moments. Yet it was also a moment of possibility, proof that exposure can lead to accountability, that dignity can remain intact even when tested in public. As the encounter concluded, the woman walked away with the same quiet strength she arrived with. But something followed her now, a ripple. The officer was left behind to face consequences, not just professionally, but internally. The kind that lingers long after a shift ends. He had been confronted not by punishment alone, but by perspective, by the undeniable humanity of the person he had wronged. Whether that lesson would change him forever was uncertain, but the seed had been planted. The woman returned home that night and allowed herself to finally feel the weight of it all. The calm she showed in public gave way to tears in private, not from weakness, but from release. Strength, she knew, was not about never hurting, it was about continuing anyway. The next morning, she would return to her work, advocating for fairness with renewed clarity, carrying this experience not as a scar, but as fuel. Stories like this are uncomfortable because they force us to look closely, to ask ourselves how often we judge without knowing, how often we stay silent when someone is humiliated in front of us. But they are also necessary, because they remind us that identity is deeper than appearances, that respect should never be conditional, and that justice loses its meaning when empathy is absent. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the kind of world you want to live in, please take a moment now to like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them. And before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment below with one word that represents what this story made you feel: hope, anger, courage, or change. Let your voice be part of the conversation, because awareness begins when we refuse to stay silent.